Hello there, good evening and welcome. Welcome to another no doubt insightful letter from Maurice Nicoll, and it continues directly from yesterday's reading, which was titled Psychological Talk, and I also have uploaded a video about worry. Maurice Nicoll spoke about and referenced worry. And so I've clipped a section and why worry, or why we worry. It's a bit of a mouthful. So it's interesting that the actual whole 5 volumes is called Maurice Nicoll's Psychological Commentaries on the work of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. And this letter or series of letters that we're going to read is called Psychological Commentaries. So that must be significant for certain because, yes, it's a psychological commentary within the psychological commentaries, but we will get into it. It's significantly longer than yesterday's reading. And like I say, I, for one, am very much enjoying reading these. I hope you're finding value and benefit from the practical and maybe the deeper level that Maurice Nicoll goes into, particularly if you've read the Ouspensky and Gurdjieff books. It's a nice way to review the material, but in a different sense, to go over it with different words, focusing on the same concepts and ideas. So that's what we're doing at the channel. I will continue to upload In Search of the Miraculous, the Perennial Philosophy, and then move into the Fourth Way. So lots coming up. I'm not going to get the graphic, but if you don't mind, if you haven't done so yet, like this video, subscribe to this channel, and so we can grow and reach more people who are interested in waking up and also religious unification. And hello there, Jordan. It's good to see you and to connect, and I hope that you are well. And let us begin. So, there's been a bit of a break between the last letter and this one in 1942 because Maurice Nicoll was writing about the Gospels, but here we are at Birdlip, May the 21st, 1942, Psychological Commentary 1. This work is psychological. It consists in making a number of specifically defined psychological efforts designed for a particular end. Everyone has a psychology as well as a body. The object of the work is to lift a person off the psychological basis he rests upon. Let us try to speak about this. Everyone admits he has a body which may be in better or worse condition. The body is an object of the senses, and, as you know, we are all inclined to take only what the senses show us as real. But everyone has also a psychology. This people do not so easily admit, for they cannot see or touch their own or another person's psychology via the outer senses. Moreover, a person is usually especially unwilling to admit that he himself has a definite kind of psychology. A definite kind of body, yes. A psychology, no. He will agree that his body may be in a wrong state, but not his psychology. One result of this is that it not infrequently occurs that a person in the work does not know where or in what direction to make any efforts. If the work consisted in a number of physical exercises, everyone would know where and in what direction efforts had to be made, and if anyone did an exercise wrongly, he would be seen doing it wrongly and corrected. A person would then know how he was progressing by the number of physical exercises he could perform correctly, and he could also feel the satisfaction of being able to do more than others could, and so on. As you know, there are schools of teaching that deal only with the body. They are the schools belonging to the first way, the way of man number 1, or even number 1 man. The object of the body by the development of will over the body is the object. The control of the body by the development of will over the body is the object. The fakir who sits with outstretched arms for years and years is an example. He develops will over the body. But by itself this is useless. In some cases, he may be taken into a school of another kind, and his arms broken down, if possible, and be given teaching to develop him psychologically. He has will over the body, but no understanding, and will without understanding is useless, or even worse than useless. And such a man, quite ignorant and stupid, may crystallize out by his incredible efforts, that is, nothing can be altered in him, and he will remain permanently ignorant and stupid whether he is taken into another school or not. But such examples show us one thing. They show us the extent of effort on oneself that is possible among Eastern people, and this may help us to understand why esoteric teaching has always come from the East. Now, this teaching that we are beginning to try to understand here does not belong to the first way, the way of the fakir, nor to the second way, which is the way of the monk, nor to the third or yogi way. It is called the fourth way, and I will mention one of the great characteristics of the fourth way soon, but will say here that one of its general objects is to unite the wisdom of the East with the science of the West. But its individual starting point is psychological, not physical, and, as said, its object is to lift a person off the psychological basis he rests upon. That is, its object is to change a person, not physically, but psychologically. The efforts that it demands in personal work are not primarily physical efforts, although these come in their place, but psychological efforts, the first of which is self-observation. To observe oneself is a psychological effort, and it is only by self-observation that you become aware that you have a psychology. You all know that this is not an easy effort to make. It is far more difficult than making a physical effort, such as doing some exercises, or cleaning pots and pans, or mixing concrete, or working a typewriter, or indeed doing anything connected with the outer visible world, which lies in space and to which we must first make a relationship. But remember that each of us lives in two worlds, one outer and visible and lying in space, and the other inner and invisible and not lying in space. Our bodies are in space, but not our psychology. But as distinct from animals, we are so made that we can look out into the visible world in space where our bodies are standing, and into the invisible world where our psychology is standing. And just as we are always somewhere in the outer world, so we are always somewhere in the inner world. Now, the idea in the work is that just as we can change our position in the outer world by physical effort, so we can change our position in the inner world by psychological effort. And just as a man can be in a better or worse place in the outer world, so can he be in a better or worse place in the inner world. But because it is difficult to look into the inner world and see where one is standing in it, people let themselves, as it were, be anywhere inside, although they would not think for a moment of letting themselves be anywhere outside. Let us try to conceive what it means that each of us has a psychology and that it is necessary to observe it. Our psychology is, from one point of view, where we are and what we frequent in this inner world. Just as we live somewhere and tend to frequent certain places in the outer world, so we live in and tend to frequent certain places in the inner world. The difference is that in this inner world we are not dealing with places in space, but with psychological states. Now, just as it is your body that brings you into contact with a physical place, so it is your psychology that brings you into contact with a psychological state. At any moment, you are somewhere physically and somewhere psychologically. Outer observation shows you where you are physically. Inner observation, that is self-observation, shows you where you are psychologically. To be in a bad state psychologically is as if you might be in a dark corner of a room, sitting there morose and gloomy, when you might shift your position easily and stand in the light. Now, the practice of self-observation in the work is to make us aware of where we are psychologically at any moment and eventually to shift our position. It leads to self-awareness, which belongs to the third state of consciousness, the state where help can reach us. Where we are psychologically at any moment is what we are at that moment, unless we are aware of it and separate internally from it. If you identify with all your inner states, with your negative emotions and dreary thoughts and so on, as people do in life if they are quite asleep, then where you are psychologically will be what you are at that moment. You will be your state at that time. Now, self-observation is not a monotonous exercise that one is supposed to perform because told to do so. It is an act of practical intelligence. It is just as practically intelligent as to notice where you are driving a car to. If you never observe anything in yourself, not only will you never avoid anything in yourself and so repeat your life day by day and always run into the same states, but you will think that your inner states are normal and natural and the only ones possible and take them for granted. You will only expect life to change, not yourself. In this way, you will not be willing to think you have a psychology at all in any sense of the word, though you will admit that you have a body which has its own peculiarities. You know what this work teaches about life, how it happens, what a dark spot in the universe we live in, and so on. Yet I suppose you will think what is happening now is exceptional. Nothing is more useful or more interesting than to pull yourself up suddenly and notice where you are inside and where you are going. If you do this, you will begin to see what sort of psychology you have and what tendencies belong to it and what it keeps on connecting you with. You will begin to notice what you are always up to inside. When you can see all this not as yourself, not as I, but as your psychology, you can begin to separate from it and so change it. But if you cannot admit that you have a psychology at all and say I to every state, it leads you into you can get nowhere, if that's how it's meant to be pronounced. And hello there, Liberty Gibbets, and welcome, my friend. Now let us change the point of view a little. Let us imagine a conversation in the following terms. Let us suppose someone in the work says to you, I find it difficult to observe myself and I cannot quite see in what sense I have a psychology. You say to him, well, you dislike X, don't you? He replies, yes, of course I do. He is very unfair. You say, some people like him. He replies, I can't help that, I dislike him. You say, well, that is a part of your psychology, you know, something to do with your mechanical dislikes. He replies, I cannot agree with you. I dislike X, and that's the end of the matter. It has nothing to do with my psychology. It is a fact. You say, well, to speak frankly, some people think you are unfair. He replies, but that is absurd. If there is anything I can be perfectly certain of, it is that I am always fair, and I always have been. You say, perhaps there is all the same something to observe here. He replies, I don't see what there is to observe. It is all as clear as daylight to me, and I think you are very unfair to suggest that I am unfair. In fact, to tell you the truth, I think you are very unfair. You say, I am not unfair. It is the last thing I ever am or wish to be. In fact, people often say how fair I am. I can see that you do not understand me. He replies, and I can see that you do not understand me. At this point, we had better terminate this imaginary conversation. Do you believe that there is no psychology here? Both the imaginary persons are becoming indignant, and neither of them apparently sees that any personal psychology enters into the situation that has arisen between them and caused it. Neither of them observes he has a cherished picture of himself as being fair. Neither of them sees he is speaking from false personality, and neither of them sees how he is lying. Let us notice one thing at this point. When we know a thing is true about ourselves and acknowledge it internally, accusation can never make us indignant. It can make us sad, perhaps. Indignation is mainly derived from false personality, imaginary I, and pictures of oneself. I refer to being indignant about oneself and how people treat one and what they say to one. It comes from ascribing to ourselves what we have not got, of imagining ourselves to be what we actually are not. And in this connection is not the fact that we are so sensitive to criticism or censure of any kind clear evidence that we have a psychology apart from merely having physical bodies? And is not this invisible psychology of ours more real to us and a greater source of suffering than are our visible bodies, save when the latter suffer considerable pain? Let us now both trace some results of this typical conversation we have imagined. Both of the people involved are indignant at being called unfair. They have, in fact, reacted just as we would ourselves. We are supposing them to be in the work, and that both are now negative. What will now happen psychologically? They will both begin to justify themselves. You know that one of the specific efforts we are taught to make in our personal work is the effort against self-justifying. Self-justifying is a complicated and very interesting process of inner and outer lying, whereby we put ourselves in the right. It belongs to our psychological level, to our level of being, and it is one of the things that keep us at that level. Negative emotions, self-justifying, identifying, and all the great central things taught in the work in connection with practical effort on oneself are the things that keep us where we are. They keep us on the psychological basis we rest upon. They prevent any change, any evolution of ourselves. This is why they are specially mentioned and defined as things to be struggled and fought with. You must not think it wrong to self-justify just because the work says so. It is not wrong in a moral sense, but of no use in work on oneself, just as it is no use mixing bread with concrete. It takes certainly some time before we can begin to see for ourselves why the work mentions certain special things against which efforts must be made. But if you say, I must not justify myself because the work says I must not, you will again get nowhere, for you will not be doing anything from yourself, from your understanding, and to work from one's understanding is one of the great characteristics of the fourth way. When you see clearly from your own self-observation that self-justifying keeps you where you are and is a process that has this as its object so that you may always be in the right at the expense of any change or evolution of yourself, and if at the same time your aim is to change, you will have far greater power to stop it, for then you will understand and want to do so from your own understanding. You will see the good of doing this for yourself. It is then possible to begin to make right effort. For if you are always going to be right, you will never be in the wrong. And if you are never in the wrong, you will never change. To feel one is always right is to block the way to any self-change. And I think that's worth reading again. For everyone, I suppose. I'm sure everyone has everyone has been indignant at some point and self-justified at some point. So I'm going to reread that. For if you are always going to be right, you will never be in the wrong. And if you are never in the wrong, you will never change. To feel one is always right is to block the way to any self-change. Let us now suppose that the two imaginary people allow the mechanical processes of self-justifying to go on unchecked, and that neither of them observes it at work in them, but that both are fully identified with it, fully engaged in it, in fact, fully liking and enjoying it without a trace of insight into themselves. They will begin to construct what can be called negative systems in themselves against one another. Once this seriously starts between two people, it is very difficult to get matters right again. They will remember only unpleasant things about one another, for when a person feels negative against another, his memory, working by association, calls up only unpleasant things which the activity of self-justifying makes eager use of. And so it will go on, just as it does in life, quite unchecked internally, but checked by outer things such as the fear of the law, the fear of libel or slander, the fear of losing one's reputation or being laughed at, etc. In short, by the external restraints that control people and which, if removed, would turn them into quite other kinds of people. You know what happens in war. You know what people can become if external restraints are removed. Now suppose these two imaginary people have already got some inner checks and inner restraints developed in them by the work, and that each of them at a certain moment comes, as it were, to his senses. I mean, wakens a little, becomes more conscious, and passes into work eyes and begins to observe himself from the feeling of the work and its influences, which are quite different from the influences of life. He notices that he is justifying himself. He notices that he is recalling only unpleasant things of the other person, and nothing pleasant, which, to say the least, is unfair. He thinks of what was said to him and what he said. He searches in that special memory formed in a man by conscious self-observation for examples of himself being unfair in the past, and finds several that he has noticed. Suddenly, all his indignation falls away from him. He is no longer defending his false idea of himself, his false pictures of himself. He sees the truth, that he is often unfair. Now, self-justifying cannot work in the presence of acknowledged truth. It is a process of lying that keeps the great central lie in us alive and well, that is, the false personality. Now, let us suppose that these two people meet next day. They will instantly know that each has worked on himself without saying a word to one another, and the whole thing is over. It is not in the past any more, it is cancelled. They are both free. All that we have been speaking about is psychology and psychological work on oneself from the point of view of this teaching and its psychological method in regard to the application of it to oneself. That was a very helpful and practical, imaginary conversation, as Maurice Nicoll says there, to help us understand. And you could do that with your own mind, even use some AI chatbot program to give examples. If in the work there's this concept of chief feature, and in this example, these two individuals, their chief feature would be indignation, self-justification, just by way of example. But you could use anything, couldn't you? You could use any characteristic or psychological vice, let's call it, that you want to turn into a virtue, and by observing it, like he says, by shining the light of consciousness on it, you see it as being very silly. When you're completely asleep and identified with the psychological state, it's the most important thing in the world, and everyone doesn't understand. Whereas when you waken a little, as he says, shine the light of consciousness, you might even laugh and think, oh dear, that was how silly, especially if you've been rude, to a senior member of the work or someone that you really respect. You'll feel even more silly. And just one more thing before we move on. You may know that Maurice Nicoll also worked with Carl Jung before he met Ouspensky and then Gurdjieff. And in Carl Jung's autobiography, wonderful text, Memories, Dreams and Reflection, he focuses on this quite intensely in the early part of the book, about how at a certain point in his life, he realized that outer life, time, space, visiting this person, this discussion, this sort of achievement at the university, he said it didn't mean anything to him, and all that mattered was his inner psychological life. So that's the last bit of commentary on the psychological commentary. And now let's continue. And Flippity Gibbet says, I have a procrastination problem. Maybe I can procrastinate on procrastination. Again, I suppose if you were procrastinating on procrastination, you wouldn't be procrastinating any longer, would you? That would be an activity. So very interesting, Flippity Gibbets, but maybe we can talk at the end about it. And for now, we're back to Birdlip, May 28th, 1942, Psychological Commentary 2 on Being, Part 1. Tonight we will speak again about knowledge and being. Can you remember anything that was said before about knowledge and being? Let me remind you that this teaching that we are studying says that there are two sides in a man that must develop in the gradual course of his transformation, the side of his knowledge and the side of his being. You have heard many times that you must first of all know this system, and this takes time and effort. But it leads to a definite development of knowledge and at the same time should lead to a development of self-knowledge if a man works. Now, it is not difficult to understand that there are different levels of knowledge, but it is not so easy to understand that there are different levels of being. Let's just try to understand once more what being is. Usually, people confuse existence with being. A stone exists, a plant exists, a man exists, but they exist quite differently. It is here that the idea of being comes in. For example, the being of a stone, the being of a plant, the being of an animal, the being of a man, and the divine being are all on different levels. The being of a thing is from its origin, but its existence is from its birth, and conception takes place before birth. Let us take the being of animals. All animals have existence from birth. A horse exists, a dog exists, a cow exists. They have a common existence. But the being of a horse, the being of a dog, and the being of a cow are quite different and are not from birth, but from conception. Now let us turn to man. Man is different from the animals. His being is capable of a definite development. He is born as a self-developing organism and so is incomplete, at a lower level of being than he is destined for by his creation. Animals are complete. Also, as distinct from animals, man's upbringing extends over a very long period during which he acquires many things in his being by education, by imitation, and by custom. This is one reason why the being of one man is not similar to the being of another man. We can understand that the knowledge of one man may not be on the same level as the knowledge of another man, but we do not so clearly see that the level of being can be different. Now, from the standpoint of this teaching, mankind is not taken as one and the same. Men are not the same in regard to their being. The concept of man in this teaching is divided into 7 categories to begin with. Number 1, man, whose center of gravity is in his instincts and movements in his physical life. Then number 2, man, whose center of gravity is in his emotional life. Then number 3, man, whose center of gravity is in his intellectual life. These 3 categories form mechanical humanity, the outer circle of mankind, who do not understand one another. As you know, this is called the circle of the confusion of tongues, the circle of Babel. Then there is number 4, man, whose center of gravity is not in the instinctive moving center, nor in the emotional center, nor in the intellectual center, but as it were distributed among them. This is the balanced man, in whom development is no longer one-sided, and in whom awakening has begun. Then there is the circle of conscious humanity, number 5, number 6, and number 7 man, and these are men who have undergone different degrees of transformation or rebirth or development, in short, who have had a new conception. Now, these 7 divisions of the general idea of man mean 7 degrees or categories of being. Let us take number 1, number 2, and number 3 man. They belong to the circle of mechanical humanity, to mankind asleep, but they show many differences in regard to their being. All 3 may live only under life influences, that is, A influences, namely influences created in life from history, from the past, from custom, from the trend of things. But some may be affected by both influences A and influences B. I will remind you that B influences are not created by life, but come from outside mechanical life, from the circle of conscious humanity. And I will remind you again that the Gospels are an example of B influences. Again, some men may be more under A than B influences, or more under B than A influences. Some may even have come into contact with C influences, namely with someone belonging to the conscious circle of humanity, with someone who has been reborn, reconceived as the disciples came in contact with Christ. Some may even be already on the way to becoming man number 4 or number 4 man. All these different states mean different levels of being. Perhaps you have noticed that the idea of a man's level of being always entered into religious thought, and it was regarded as more important than anything else. The level of being of a saint was different from that of a sinner. Good men, bad men, evil men, truthful men, liars, sincere men, patient men, hypocrites, self-righteous men, vainglorious men, and so on, are all terms referring to the side of being, not to the side of knowledge in a man. Nowadays, people seem to be coming to think that what a man is does not matter in view of what he knows. They even think that a man with criminal being can be a great thinker or a great scientist or a great artist or a great writer. And if you remember from In Search of the Miraculous, Gurdjieff expands on this somewhat and says that just because a person is in a position of power, some politician, some professor, anyone in a position of power, they can still be asleep and as asleep as everyone else. You know, the what does he call it? Not the conscious circle of humanity. Oh, it's on the other page. I'm not going back, but you know, the sleeping humanity, man number 1, 2, and 3. The thing to realize is that the majority of humans that make up the world exist in this segment, if you like, of the 3 brain beings breeding on the planet Earth, and man number 4, and then there's a distinction in Search of the Miraculous, man number 1, 2, and 3, man number 4 as a sort of transitional phase, and then man number 5, 6, and 7. And again, this is all just pointing to things regarding being, so that we can understand that, just as someone has more or less knowledge, or higher or lesser knowledge, is so the same with being. So let's continue with part 2. Let us now come to the knowledge of this work and its relation to our being. This work is given as knowledge and so must be learned, just as any other kind of knowledge must be learned. But this work comes from greater mind. It is not ordinary knowledge. It is knowledge about transformation, just as the Gospels are knowledge about rebirth or being born anew, and whether we call it transformation or rebirth makes no difference. It is knowledge coming from those who attained full inner development and have reached, by a growth and transformation of their being, the state of consciousness called objective consciousness. Now, the knowledge taught in this work must gradually become your knowledge, i.e., you must know the knowledge of the work teaches, first of all, and this takes time and effort. But since this knowledge comes from a level of humanity far above our level of being, the full understanding of this knowledge will not be possible until our level of being corresponds with the level of knowledge that the work teaches. As you know, a union between knowledge and being is necessary before understanding results. For this reason, this knowledge that you are studying must be applied to your being, and you will certainly not apply it if you do not value the ideas of the work. A parallel development of knowledge and being is necessary. That is, you must work on your being in accordance with the knowledge you are taught to raise your level of being. With the level of being you possess at present, you will be able to understand the knowledge of the work up to a point. If you have something good in your being, you will be able to understand something of this work and not merely know it. So there's a clear distinction between understanding and knowing something, a clear distinction. There is a saying in the work that you must have gold to get gold. This refers to the quality of being a person has. If there is good in him, he already has a little gold. No one can understand beyond the level of his being. You will now see why a man with bad being, a degenerate man, a confirmed liar, a moral imbecile, a criminal, and so on, cannot understand this work. And also you will see why it is said in regard to new people entering this work that they must be at the level of good householders. But even so, they must be people who are looking for something, people who do not quite believe in life and who feel that there must be something else, some other meaning in their existence to this planet. So, just very quickly, I'm going to go to full screen, page 9 if I forget. I've been thinking about another writing project that I want to share that I think is going to be helpful to people. And one of the concepts that I've been thinking about quickly, or been thinking about, and that comes up and it's reminded me of there, is, as Maurice Nicoll saying, these books, the canonical texts of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky and Fritz Peters and all of the names, we can list off all the names, they're coming from a higher level of being than influences which make up normal life on Earth. And so I've got this concept and to distinguish a natural awakening or a natural coming to consciousness, and then an intentional awakening. So, and quickly, an example of a natural awakening would be you're reading In Search of the Miraculous or any of the other work texts, and you're reading the intellectual center is working, but you're reading something that sort of makes you feel quite emotional. You know, you're reading a powerful passage from Gurdjieff and it makes you feel an intense longing to awaken, you know, that I don't want to be asleep. I want to try and wake up. And then you sort of have a sensation of your whole body, and then you're awake for a moment. The text has naturally awoken you. And so, of course, that's an example of a natural awakening. But then you're off in your day, you're going to work, you are on your lunch break, and you're not reading a text. You're just walking to the shop to get a coffee. And now you're walking along and you remember the reading that you had this morning or one of the texts, or you remember the concept that one should remember themselves. They never do. And you say, here I am walking to get my coffee. So, you know, you bring in all of the centers. First, you might sense your body, where you are, the weather, the sensations of the temperature and the weather conditions. Then you might, how am I feeling? Am I, in a state of irritation, of worry, of joy, of exuberance? And then you can observe your thoughts. And this is self-remembering, bringing in all of the three centers into a full impression, the first conscious shock it would be called. And so this would be an intentional awakening. You haven't come about it naturally and spontaneously from reading a text or hearing a text read, but you've remembered yourself, and this is one of the main issues in the work, that man never remembers himself. And so, of course, these things occur. So forgive that brief digression about the two different aspects of awakening, but I couldn't help myself. And so let's get back to part 3. So many things are said in this teaching about being that it is impossible to speak of them at one time. Let me mention one thing said about being which interested me very much when I first heard it. The saying was, your being attracts your life. And obviously it says there, tall being, but I think we can easily work out your being attracts your life. This saying made me see at once that there is a connection between what is outer and what is inner. As above, so below. For example, on a general scale, the level of being of mankind attracts war. If the being of mankind were on even a slightly higher level, war as it is now would be impossible. On an individual scale, a person's being attracts his life. It will always attract the same kind of things, the same situations, the same kind of friends, the same sort of people, the same difficulties, and so on, no matter where the person is or where he goes. To change being is to change one's life, but to change one's form of life is not to change one's being. By altering your outside condition, you will not change your life, because your being will continue to attract a certain kind of life. A horse attracts to itself a certain kind of life, different from that of a cow or a dog, and you can understand that this is due to their difference in being. By changing its form of life, a cow will not change. You would not like a cow to sit with you by the fireside or be on your bed, not merely because it would be inconvenient, but because its being is so different from that of a dog. In general, you can see that the being of animals connects them with a certain kind of life. A weasel is attracted to the life of a weasel, a snake to the life of a snake, and so on. But we do not see in a similar way that the law that the being attracts the life holds for the small difference of being in people. Of course, you have to study your being to see that you have a certain kind of being, and study your life to see that you have a certain kind of life. People do not easily see that they have very distinct and limited outlines. They think they are boundless and free. They think they can be anything they please and do anything they wish and live how they choose. But if one begins to study one's being and at the same time one's life, one discovers that one has a certain kind of being. This is a very long task. This work says that the study of our being is absolutely necessary. And just one more digression. Actually, I'm lying. It probably won't be one more. It won't be the last one. But I'm feeling a digressive mood this evening, obviously. Being and work on being. Think about it from a Buddhist perspective. You find a Buddhist text, a foundational Buddhist text, and it talks about the Four Noble Truths, learning about suffering. And then you realize, yeah, I do suffer a lot, and it comes from my mind, and I'd like to stop that suffering so much. And so then you learn about the Noble Eightfold Path, and you say, oh, these things are very interesting, and maybe I can incorporate some of these aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path, and maybe observe my mind in meditation and suffer less. And so imagine the difference in being of that person 6 months into Buddhism, or of course the fourth way, that should go without saying. They suffer less. Their mind is less active. They're more virtuous. They're more compassionate. They're more loving. They have encompassed much of what Buddha left to the world. Same can be said of Jesus and Krishna. And this is why the four ideals here, we don't discriminate between the religious traditions, because by bringing any one of them into our lives, our being will be raised up, especially if it's with sincerity and intention. But let's get back to the text. You know, this work says that we are machines driven by external impressions. Now, as long as a man has no knowledge of his being, he is certainly a machine. For a machine cannot know itself. If it did, it would not be a machine. But a man-machine can know itself. When a man begins to know himself, he is no longer a machine. He may indeed even become a man. But this takes a long time and great effort. It takes a different kind of effort, of course, from that required to learn the knowledge of the work. That is, work on the line of knowledge and work on the line of being require different efforts. A man cannot get to know himself unless he observes himself with his internal attention, and he cannot observe himself intelligently unless he has been taught definite knowledge of what to observe and sees a reason for it. There are certain special factors in our being that prevent its development. One, for example, is negative emotion, such as self-pity and so on. These special factors must be known first of all as a matter of knowledge. So you learn first the knowledge of the work, but then you must apply it so as to gain actual knowledge of your being in the light of the teaching. Knowledge of your being is self-knowledge. But in this teaching it is a particular kind of self-knowledge, because this teaching points to certain things in one's being that must be observed and ultimately changed through an increasing willingness to change them. Merely to know that negative emotions are bad and keep us at our level of being is not enough. But it often happens that people do not observe themselves along the lines taught them, or do not connect that what they observe with what they are taught, or they take everything they feel and think, or think and feel and imagine and do and say for granted, and cannot see there is anything to observe. But how then can one expect to change oneself if one takes everything in oneself for granted? One is then a machine, not a man. It is strange not to be able to observe anything in oneself. A shock is necessary, but this often makes a person negative. Yet then he notices something. Part 4. Everyone acts from the sense of good, from what he thinks good. No one acts from evil, but a man acts from good according to his level of being, that is, from what appears to him as good. A thief steals because he feels it is good to steal. A revolutionist shoots people because he thinks it is good to shoot them. So good struggles with good. Just as knowledge is relative, so is good relative. Now good is relative to the level of being. What people regard as good is different in different cases. Perhaps you have noticed that what you thought good formerly, you do not think good now. This means a change in the level of being. If the level of being changes only a little, you have at once a new perception of good. For example, perhaps you do not like to be as negative as you once were. This is due to a slight change in the level of being. The knowledge of this work is about reaching a higher level, and so is about another life, here. Again, as I shared my Buddhist example, there's Nicoll saying a similar thing. But it must be learned and verified by application to one's being through self-observation and through personal thought about it. When its truth begins to be seen by you, for yourself, the driver or mind in you is beginning to wake up from its life sleep. When you begin to see the good of doing and living the work, your being begins to change. When you see it is good to remember yourself, good to stop internal considering, good to step aside from ridiculous illusions and pictures of yourself, and from the vanity and self-conceit of false personality, good to dislike your negative states, good to realize your own nothingness at times, good to struggle with identifying always, good to think of all the teachings of the work, good to value it. All these and 1,001 other things, then you are getting a new perception of good, and that means the level of your being is changing, and good of a higher or inner level is replacing the former level of good. And so, yeah, a lot to take away from this reading, and we're not finished yet, a few pages to go, but yeah, just really think and consider and try and have like an emotional feeling about what it would mean, a level of being, to raise your level of being. You've got all of the 4 ideals, 6 archetypes, to move towards them, to move closer to them. What would it mean? Yeah, just leave that hanging out there. Birdlip, June the 4th, 1942, Psychological Commentary 3 on Being, continued. Part 1. Everyone who has taken up this work seriously and reflected upon its meaning by means of that faculty which we all possess but rarely use, namely thinking for oneself, should eventually be capable of entering consciously into and understanding the position of others. This is a development of being essential for us in the work. No one can develop alone. Now, relationship is possible only through the contact of inner worlds. We meet through our inner worlds. To understand another, you must enter into his inner world, but this is not possible if you have not entered your own inner world. The first step, therefore, towards entering consciously into and understanding the position of another is attained through entering into and understanding the position of oneself. And unless this step is taken to as full a degree as is possible, there is little or no possibility of entering into and understanding the position of another person. And I believe this would be called empathy or empathetic, having empathy for the other person, putting yourself in their shoes. The entry into oneself begins with self-observation, and the understanding of oneself comes through long self-study in the light and knowledge of this teaching, whose ultimate aim is the gradual but definite transformation of oneself. For this reason, merely to think that one is capable of entering into and understanding the position of another person and even giving help as one is, and this illusion is very common, is to misunderstand entirely the nature of human contact and the universal difficulties that attend this impulse, which so frequently ends in disaster or some sort of compromise which, as often as not, is the breeding ground of bitterness, mutual criticism, hostility, and even worse, emotional states and trains of thought. No one, as he is mechanically, that is, as formed by life and its influences, can enter into and understand another, and from that give help, unless he already knows from his own self-observation, self-study, and insight and work on himself what is in the other person. Only through self-knowledge is knowledge of others practically possible. Only by seeing, knowing, and understanding what is in yourself can you see, know, and understand what is in another person. One of the greatest evils of human relationship is that people make no attempt to enter into one another's position but merely criticize one another without any restraint, and do not possess any inner check to this mechanical criticism, owing to the absence of any insight into themselves and their own glaring crudities, faults, and shortcomings. As a result, not only do they not help each other, but the normal balance of things is upset, and by this I mean that an accumulation of wrong or evil psychic material is formed daily in human relationships, and in fact in everyone's life, which should never exist if people saw themselves and others simultaneously, and in this way could neutralize the effects of their conduct day by day. This lack of psychological responsibility, both to oneself and to others, is perhaps especially characteristic of modern times, and is the source of one part of the widespread modern unhappiness that marks the present age. Again, writing in 1942, in which, amongst other things, there is a decline in even ordinary human kindness, with a resulting hardness which is among the most dangerous factors in regard to the future, and which effectually stops all possibility of the right development of the emotional life. Back in 1942, this was the case before World War II, and how much is that relevant today? People in this work who have a chance of emotional development should particularly observe silent or expressed criticism of others as a continual wrong factor in themselves, which continually is making wrong psychic material in them, and sincerely reflect upon what they are doing. In many cases, stupidity, thick-headedness, and ignorance are underlying causes, but many causes exist, as an unusual degree of vanity and self-complacency, or feeling that one is in the right, or self-meritoriousness, feelings of virtue and superiority, and other factors of this kind, which of course bar the way to any inner self-change. I mention here, particularly in connection with the mechanical feeling of merit and self-excellence, those who expect others to change and do not start from themselves, and who even judge of the work by its effects on others without apparently realizing that they have very much work to do on themselves before they can pass judgment on others, and also that other people are judging them in precisely the same way as they judge others, a fact which always surprises them. Mechanical criticism of others produces a great many psychological difficulties in the person who criticizes, that is, wrong eyes which hinder their own inner development and freedom. Perhaps this is not clear. What is meant is that if you allow critical and negative eyes to develop freely in yourself, they will turn on you in the work and hinder your own understanding and your own development. What you do to others, you do to yourself. Everything is arranged in this way. Everything wrong gradually reacts on yourself in the work. After a time, you will learn that you cannot afford to sleep too much and to talk and act mechanically and let your life be in the hands of wrong eyes. You will begin to see for yourself that you must really live more consciously in regard to your inner world, in which all past accounts must eventually be cancelled. And to live more consciously in your inner world is not to go with bad eyes to begin with. Remember that if you are in the work, you are putting yourself under more laws than others, namely under the laws of the work. You are putting yourself in a position in which you must obey what the work teaches. Part 2. The purification of the emotional life in this work can perhaps artificially be divided into two sides for the purposes of practical self-observation. We will deal first with the emotions arising from false personality or imaginary I. This imaginary oneself to which this work is constantly calling your attention, and which should be a matter of daily self-study and work, in view of the fact that it is the source of so much daily misunderstanding and unhappiness and offence. This thing, formed by ourselves and by the environmental influences of our upbringing and resting, as it were, like a coloured bubble on the surface of our psychic life, confuses and distorts the whole of our inner world. It forms a part of our acquired being. The fundamental causes of almost all the misunderstandings arising in the inner world of man, as well as in the sphere of the common life of people and any possible human relationship between them, is this psychic factor called the false personality, which is formed in the preparatory period of life. The simulation of this psychic factor in a person, both before and during the period of responsible life, gives rise to the emotions of vanity and self-conceit. These emotions arising from the simulation of the false personality stand in the way of the normal development of the emotional center, and it can be said that they stand in the way of any development of consciousness as well. They prevent the third state of consciousness, the state of self-awareness, that degree of happiness and of self-consciousness which should exist in a real person, a real man, as well as in a peaceful, common human existence, depends almost entirely on the absence in one of vanity and self-conceit. But these emotions can take very subtle forms and require long and sincere inner observation and a great deal of insight and gradual self-realization. But often people even imagine they have not got them, and although they are constantly being offended and upset by what others say or by the way they are treated, they do not see that this has any connection with their vanity or self-conceit. After a time, when buried conscience begins to awaken, these emotions can be felt by inner taste. They are impure emotions. This indeed is what is chiefly meant in religious writings by impurity, and what in the Gospels is so much attacked, as in the case of the Pharisees, who do everything to be seen of men, that is, out of vanity and self-conceit. You know that when you are doing good to others and feel merit, it is your self-love that you are doing good to. This is impurity in the emotions. But if you do a thing out of the love of it, it is pure. Unfortunately, this happens as a rule only in connection with satisfying our appetites. The second factor in regard to the purification of the emotional life is, as you all know, the factor of negative emotions. I will not speak of them now except to remind you that they take many subtle forms. After a time, they can be recognized through inner taste. They all smell badly. Remember also that at birth there is no false personality, but born amongst sleeping people who enjoy their negative emotions, the child acquires them as by infection. The pleasure people take in being negative is imitated by the child, and at the same time the formation of false personality in the child assists the process because through the emotions of vanity and self-conceit, the means of being easily offended are formed in all their endless diversity. A very powerful passage on the state of things. Now, our level of being is characterized by the impure state of the emotional life described above. Work on being in regard to the emotional center demands, therefore, among other things, efforts to observe and realize the existence of these emotions in oneself, noticing their origin and the course they take and the effects they give rise to. When we are properly conscious of something in ourselves, we are on the way to changing it. The consciousness of it alone, if it is full enough, will begin to change it. Once you have seen something in yourself, in your being clearly, it will lead to your seeing something else. Understand that being must change and change definitely in everyone without exception, and it must change now and here. Again, that's worth reading. Again, a rewind, a repeat. Understand that being must change and change definitely in everyone without exception, and it must change now and here. Religious people often suppose they will be changed in some hereafter, or they imagine that just as they are with the level of being they have and all their negative emotions, vanity, self-conceit, malicious talking, jealousies, unpleasant curiosities, and so on, they can reach God. And there are many other similar illusions, all of which are due to not seeing one's level of being, which actually determines where we are situated in the scale or ladder of all kinds of being, reaching up to the divine being. Everyone is at some place in this ladder. Now, in this work, on the psychological side, you are given knowledge about how to change being, and this knowledge must be applied to your own being through observing yourself in accordance with what the knowledge tells you to observe. From this, you get knowledge of your being and can begin to work on your being. If you begin to possess some real knowledge of your own being and have worked on it, then you will be able to enter into and understand the position of another person and so help him, but only in so far as your own knowledge of yourself and your own difficulties goes. And among other things, you will be able to know when you are speaking from vanity or a sense of superiority, or from a negative feeling from the desire to hurt or merely criticize, and so on. In short, you will be able to distinguish between the pure and impure in yourself better, and from this be able to speak more purely to one another. If while you are speaking, you are seeing in yourself what you are seeing in the other, you will speak purely, or more purely, and what is pure in this sense cannot hurt another or offend him, but will help him. And if you do not know at the time when you are speaking to another whether you spoke rightly, yet you have spoken with the double consciousness of yourself and the other person, which is speaking in a state of self-remembering, namely looking in and out simultaneously, then you will know later by aftertaste. That is, the work will show you. For everything done sincerely from the feeling of the work will be preserved for you and shown you in its right light if you listen and do not fall asleep. Part 3, in the final page. In the paper that was read last time, it was said that in religious writings many things are said about being. People are divided according to their state of being into saints and sinners, bad and good, men, and so on. Many things are said in the Gospels that refer to being. In the parable of the sower sowing the seed of the word of God in mankind, the different categories of men mentioned are divided according to their being in relation to the seed of the word, to their reception of it. In another place, men with wrong being are called thorns or thistles. In the passage where Christ says, "Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles?" Men are then compared by Christ in regard to their level of being with trees, and it is said, "Every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but the corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit." All this means that the level of being of a man is of the greatest importance. As you know, it is necessary to think about a person's level of being before you bring him into this work. Something very serious is meant here, and by now you all begin to understand what it is. The tendency today to make criminals heroes is entirely wrong. There are two signs of being in regard to people that you might wish to bring into the work. They must be responsible people, and they must have some magnetic center. Other things have been said in the past on this question, and I will try to recall some of them now. Apart from the idea of good householder and magnetic center, a person entering the work should have a natural sense of shame. You know that many so-called moral defectives have no sense of shame, and this is a very bad sign. And notice here that by being hard and never feeling shame, you arrest the development of your own being. Again, people entering into the work should have some sense of religion, some trace in their lives of a religious impulse that is, of course, connected with magnetic center and with past influences and education. They should feel something of morality, have some awareness of their own mortality. All these factors and several others form starting points in their being from which ideas and teachings of the work can develop. Whew. Another intense and jam-packed, full series of letters there from Maurice Nicoll. We covered a lot. Our inner psychology as compared to our outer physicality, knowledge and being, that took up most of it. How we understand there's different levels of knowledge regarding certain subjects and concepts, but it's much more difficult to realize different levels of being in oneself. And like I say, another beautiful series of letters from Maurice Nicoll. I agree, Jordan. And so much in them to take away. For me, I just really love how he's constantly exhorting us to value the work, to have it in high esteem in our own lives, to think from the work, to live our lives from a work perspective. And it's just, for me, like I say, it's always of value to be told that, to remember it, to feel it. Again, from the emotional center. It's all very well knowing those words. You should value the work highly. Yeah, I know that. But when you feel it in your heart, then the work can really begin to do wonders in one's life, and one can begin to raise their being, which is ultimately the idea. Gurdjieff de Ouspensky's book, The Reality of Being. And again, I don't need to list all the books, but you know what I mean. So, I very much enjoyed reading that. I'm thoroughly enjoying working through these psychological commentaries. I only wish I could make 10 commentary videos per reading, but sadly, there's life outside of the four ideals. Maybe one day this will be the foremost aspect of life and I can speak much more on the channel, but at this point in time, it's a small aspect, let's say, but a very important one, and I value all of your attention very much. Because for me, this is the most important thing in life. The work, waking up, raising one's being, learning more, understanding more, and going out into the world and not reacting to it, Steve Jobs would say, make a dent in the universe. And I think if we go out with all of these things in mind, valuing the work very highly, we can, in a sense, be like a beacon, not identifying, not expressing negative emotions, not gossiping, not doing all these things not being blind to our own faults. What does Jesus say? Remove the mote from your own eye before you worry about the beam in your brother's eye. Work on ourselves, because oftentimes whatever we're judging in the other person is something that we dislike in ourselves. But a lot of additional commentary from myself this evening, so I hope that didn't detract and only brought even more value. That's my hope when I do digress and share a few words. And more coming up. I'll be uploading historical videos, more in Search the Miraculous, more perennial philosophy, and more commentaries perhaps. We still have to finish Kipling's Kim before we can move on to the Hartman's book, but that'll be occurring very soon. So lots coming up here at the Four Ideals. I'm very much enjoying. The commentaries, ideally, because that's the work text we are working through currently, but soon we'll have the Hartmans, Our Life with Mr. Gurdjieff, Czeslaw Czechowicz's Gurdjieff, A Master in Life, The Women of the Rope, even maybe C.S. Knott's text, which is much more intellectual and metaphysical and philosophical, but there's a lot to read. And then I'd even like to maybe read the Fritz Peters books again, because they're absolutely wonderful. So lots coming up here at the channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. But if you do, you can always come back and have a look later. But for now, thanks everyone so much for sharing this time with me. It's been great being with you. Look after yourselves, take care, and I hope to see you next time. Bye now.